Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode in the series of The Art of Astrology, where we go into an exploration of the astrology indicators in the charts of people that have contributed art forms to the world for our enjoyment, but also that have exhibited specialized skill in a particular area of life. And it's also meant to give you an idea of the art of astrology in practice as well. I'm Theodore Naicker from Spica Astrology, and I'm joined by Mr. Patrick Adams. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Theo. How's it going?
Good, good. It's been a while since our last video. Okay, so today we have quite an interesting topic. We're going to be looking at the charts of the main players in this Alice in Wonderland sort of saga. And we're going to be doing two parts. In the first part, we're going to be talking about Alice, and the second part, we're going to be talking about the author of the Alice in Wonderland set of novels himself, Charles Dodgson. So just to remind us again, we're talking about art, and we're examining the art of somebody's life in terms of their contribution, and also the art of astrology. And this is a Wikipedia definition. Art is defined as a diverse range of human activities in creating visual, auditory, or performing artifacts or artworks, expressing the author's imaginative, conceptual idea or technical skill intended to be appreciated for their beauty or emotional power. In their most general form, these activities include the production of works of art, the criticism of art, the study of the history of art, and the aesthetic dissemination of it. And the definition from Merriam-Webster's dictionary is that art is a skill acquired by experience, the study or observation. It's a branch of learning in one of the humanities or liberal arts. It's an occupation requiring knowledge or skill. It's the conscious use of skill and creative imagination, especially in the production of aesthetic objects and the works so produced. So it's a skill that becomes an art. So I'm supposing once you master the skill. So if you're Michael Phelps and you're an Olympic swimmer, swimming is an art form for you. It's a branch of learning in a specific in the social sciences. It's an occupation that requires the use of knowledge and skill. So whatever your learning or skill set is, how you're using it is the art of how you're doing it, and then the conscious use of the skill in a creative way to produce aesthetically pleasing objects and other sort of works. So today we're specifically looking at the book Alice in Wonderland, which is an 1865 novel written by the English author Charles Dodgson under the pseudonym Lewis Carroll. The book was illustrated by John Tenniel, and here's one of the illustrations that we've got here up on the left-hand side of the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. The basic synopsis is it tells of a girl named Alice falling through a rabbit hole into a fantasy world populated by peculiar anthropomorphic creatures. The tale plays with logic, giving the story lasting popularity with adults as well as with children. It is considered to be one of the best examples of the literary nonsense genre. Its narrative course, structure, characters, and imagery have been enormously influential in both popular culture and literature, especially in the fantasy genre.
How many movies has this book spawned, and TV series and comic sketches?
Yes,
so many.
And I think it's the impact socially and in the evolution of, also us paying attention to children more, because he's basically writing this at the time of, in Victorian England, in the time of the Industrial Revolution. And so children were working in factories, children were just part of the family, there to work, there to, survive. There wasn't much attention on children themselves, in terms of what went on in their head. They would just, you just tell them bedtime stories, they be good, they do good, they follow the rules. And I think what's nice about the book, even reading it as an adult, is that it sort of reminds you of the range of imagination in which children sort of live. For us, these things are basically just stories, but for children who are going through it, it's actually sort of an experience more than sort of an intellectual exercise. So
I think,
yeah.
Wasn't there a popular adage at that time, children should be seen and not heard, or something like that? I think that was that was the popular saying. Yes, children should be seen and not heard. And this is, the story is wonderfully nonsense.
Yes. And it's actually the first, it's actually the first time in British children literature that there's a female protagonist.
Oh, yes.
As well. So I think that's also pretty important given the time we're talking about and the role of women in society, let alone children at that time. So, okay.
She wasn't the second. Did the sequel not also have a pretty strong, it was Alice, but in this one it was the Queen of Hearts, and then in the next one it was the White Queen and the Red Queen or something like that, Through the Looking Glass.
And yes, to Alice and the Alice
Through the Looking Glasses. Yeah.
And the mirror of this is Charlie in the Chocolate Factory and Charlie in the Great Glass Elevator. This,
yes.
It's sort of like a parallel sort of thing that Roald Dahl did as well. Also a very successful novel in its own right. So,
I think as a mathematician, I also find the books quite interesting sometimes. They touch on weird things, and the way, and I'll speak about it a bit more when we look at Charles Dodgson's chart. But just the way that very, very basic things like concepts like limits, which are central to the ideas of differential and integral calculus, and logic, which we know Charles Dodgson also worked in. How everything is just laid out so plainly in the book. It's very, very rare that you would be able to have something like that would seem either nonsensical or whatever it is, but on closer inspection you realize, oh wow, there's a method to the madness and there's order in the chaos.
Right. Because he is actually an adult writing this novel. Okay, so let's get into the first character we'll talk about is Liddell herself, Alice. Now, for those of you who don't know, Alice is the namesake for the book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, or Alice in Wonderland. And what was happening is that the author, Charles, was actually he was working in the Christchurch University in Oxford, in England, as a lecturer, a tutor in mathematics, and at the same time he also was working in the library. And out in the libraries, the garden next to the library, he was very prolific sort of photographer, and so he takes photos of a lot of people. And he one day saw these children playing in the garden, and they so happened to be the children of the dean of the college, of the university. And so that's how he got to know their family, taking photos of their children, and a whole lot of other people as well. And so he became quite close to the family in all their children and the family as well, like the wife and the husband, and over a period of, I think, over a decade. And so Alice is one of those little children that he spent a lot of time with, entertaining in his off time with some of his friends as well. And it became a very close relationship, an association between him and the children and their parents. So because Alice is such a central feature of the books in terms of the personality and the main protagonist of the books, we want to actually look at the chart for Alice Liddell. Now, Alice, the person, we don't actually have a birth time for her, and I initially put her time around midday, around solar noon, but I made a slight adjustment because she did pose for, she was very photogenic for her time, even as a child. And so I wanted to have Venus in association with the ascendant, which is what you have here. Venus is sextile the ascendant from Gemini. Very playful, very cute sort of child. And you could say that Charles Dodgson is the Venus friend in the 11th house, who wrote a book, Gemini, about this female protagonist. You know, Venus in Gemini in the 11th house made sense. But also having a 10th house Sun being ruled by the same Venus on the 11th house cusp, that also makes sense because as an adult, she did a lot of work running the Women's Institute of her local area during wartime in Britain. And that was a huge role. You know, the Sun in Taurus, with the stellium in Taurus, with Saturn in Taurus. It wasn't easy because there was rationing of resources all over the country. And the Women's Institute played a very important role, actually, in keeping the UK afloat, at least from a production and food point of view, because a lot of their imports were being sort of squandered by the German U-boats. And trade was basically pointless, you know, sea trade, which was Britain's strength at the time. So you know, it can be very easily argued that without the Women's Institute in the UK at the time, these women went out in groups to, you know, chop down trees. They helped farmers on the farm. They helped out in factories. They invented new ways of using textiles. It's just amazing the kind of work that they did. Emergency food shelters, and I mean, it's a lot. If you research and Google it, you'll see that it was no easy sort of feat. And so the sort of administration role, close to the people in government, working with the people in government, it makes sense with the Sun in the 10th. And she was very self-assured as a child, having Leo rising with also a fixed sign Sun on the angle. So and that's what she was described as, very self-assured, very composed, knowing herself, and which was unusual compared to her other two sisters, and which made her stand out. You know, it is an angular Sun, you know, you're going to stand out amongst your peers in a way. And she was described as also being quite pushy and bossy as a child, particularly the words that was used for her was imperious. You know, so that sense of this is sort of who I am, I know myself, you know, very confident about how I'm thinking. And so that is a very strong Leo rising trait that is not easy to change. And you can also see that you have the Mars in Leo in the first sign, indicating, yes, in her youth she may have been a little bit more brash, but it is in the 12th house. So it's not going to be that she's violent against people with it. She's not going to, you know, bash people down for saying that she's not who she is. not seeing her, not recognizing her, but she's probably going to be a bit bossy, the sort of that mild Mars influence in the ascending sign, not very close to the ascendant point, but it's there. Mars does rule the 4th house and the 12th house. The 4th house ruler is in the 12th house. So yes, there were issues about home and family, and they moved around and things like that. Now, anything you want to say, Patrick? We're just coming to
you can't quash those Leonine traits at all.
No.
And
no.
it's really interesting to think actually, assuming maybe that she might have been born like a few minutes later, this ascendant might have flipped all the way into Virgo. Then she'd be somebody totally different.
Yeah.
One has no.
It's true. Either way, it's very fixed because it's all going back to that stellium in Taurus.
Yeah.
And the stellium also contains Saturn, which is also quite a rigid sort of planet.
The fixed signs are generally quite good at doing these types of administrations. And
yes, the themes of the themes of not only Taurus, which is the food, and the pastoral agricultural land issues which is what she was leading up as a profession. That's what she did as work for a very long time. Actually, she called herself lady, even though she didn't have the title formally. So you see the sun really ruling the ascendant. But it's still very fixed. Taurus themes of food and agriculture and pastoral. The whole thing about how cows were viewed and livestock was viewed, because they had mass cullings of livestock because they wanted to use the farmland for wheat, and flax and things like that. So, and the whole milk industry changed. The milk industry in the UK changed dramatically during World War II because they needed milk. And so cows were being fed artificial milk. And so you started getting all these sort of small initiatives happening in changing our view of what Taurus was. Actually, some artificial fertilizers now being used for the first time on a more massive scale, because previously they were seen as bad for the soil, or the chemicals. And now people didn't have a choice because the government ordered them to double the UK production of certain produce within a couple of years.
It's really interesting to see. These are the types of things that were going on when Uranus was actually lost in Taurus, back when she was born at 4 degrees.
Yes.
And Uranus is back into Taurus now again for its own return.
Yes. Correct.
So you have all of these, that time, land problems, money problems.
Yep.
And I wonder where we are going to now this time around with Uranus's next trip through the sign.
Yes, we'll see now when Uranus comes back again into Taurus next year, middle of March next year. Actually,
Uranus is being non-committal about it right now, isn't it?
Yes,
going in and out, in and out.
So, having also Pluto there, but it's very, very pronounced. Anything that's a stellium in the chart is going to compete with the ascendant for sort of life direction. And because the sun is in Taurus anyway, this makes it extremely powerful in this chart. Extremely powerful, okay, and extremely relevant.
She rules, the sun rules her, or she rules the sun? Oh no, sorry, I'm thinking of the wrong thing. Don't worry.
Yes. So it's very, very strong. And so the influences on the ascendant is very strongly the Venusian influence. Now, you can say, yes, also with the fixity of the rising sign, she was very committed. She had one marriage. She married a cricketer. And that was it. There was no other multiple. Even though the Venus is in Gemini, you think experimental. Yes, it's experimental. But Saturn is controlling the luminaries in this chart. Saturn is conjunct the sun. It's opposing the moon. Yeah. So even though it is a Scorpio full moon deep down in the bottom half of the chart, where things are hidden and in certain intensity behind or within her, which, childhood experiences and stuff like that. I mean, having, more than 6 siblings makes sense that you're going to experience some lack in the third house, because you have to compete for affection of your parents. You have to compete for resources that you're sharing at the dinner table. All those things, we learn how to compete and fight for the things we want as children with our siblings.
That's true. That's true.
So let me just so having the Saturn influence very strong on the luminaries of the chart, that speaks to her commitment. The nice thing about having emphasis on fixed signs in your chart is that, while some people say, oh, I'm not fixed, I'm not stubborn, that's very negative way of looking at it. The fixed signs give you endurance. You're focused on performance. You're focused on the criteria for performance and endurance in your life. And we need people like that sometimes in the workplace. We need people like that in leadership because there's a certain continuity and dependability that comes with it that the other sort of signs, the modalities of don't really have.
They give you pretty good intuition as well.
Yes, because it's the gut.
Somebody with the Leo ascendant like this, very sure of what they're doing.
Yes, very assured, and you can rely on them. And once they know who they are, then the life just opens up because it's that sense of surety. You have a clear purpose, and you go after it. There's no messing around. So quite a fixed chart, but the only thing that is not fixed in the chart actually is the Venus. From a visible planet point of view, the only non-fixed planet here is Venus. And like I said, ironically, that's the one Venus that's ruling the whole chart. So even though it's the only one that is, sort of not fixed, it's very powerful. It's also very powerful because it is in exchange with Mercury. Mercury is in the sign of Venus, and Venus is in the sign of Mercury. So once she meets a very important Venus 11th house friend, then her life is going to completely change. Because all of a sudden now she's going to have Mercury in Gemini in the 11th house and Venus in Taurus in the 10th. So very, very, this person is going to be elevated because of that, okay? It's a very nice elevation. It's happening with the 9th house and the 10th house and the 11th house, right? Those are very nice. Those things exchanging, we're happy about, right? Because they're just making what's already good even better. So here you can see that, obviously Lewis Carroll writing the book basically for her and around her as a personality is the Gemini Venus in the 11th house. And once that was given to her, the rest of her life was basically made. She had speaking arrangements, she became a celebrity, and in those days, it wasn't celebrity limelight lasted a bit longer, right? Especially with all this fixity, right? So that becomes very, very, very strong. If we learn to look at, so that's kind of a career, basic synopsis of the chart is it's all coming down to that Venus-Mercury swapping in exchange. Once that comes into place, this person is just going places. In terms of her parents, her father was quite into the religious organizations of universities in those days. So you do see Jupiter on the 4th house cusp representing a quality of the father, with the ruler of that being Mars in the 12th house and also ruling the 9th house. So her father was an educator. He was the dean of the college. The Mars is in the sign of the sun, very high office, involved with government and bureaucracy and all of that. So I think that it is the first sign, Mars, so it's strong. What did you say?
No, I said also literally, the Mars literally in the 12th house of institution.
Yes.
But of course the first sign.
So it's more conscious, willful activity in those institutions. Having Venus connected to the ascendant, it's not just also representing the friendships, but she also posed for a lot of photographs. She loved taking her picture taken, She also posed as a model for some people later in her life. So very photogenic, and sort of having a sort of Venus blessing of charisma and beauty from a very, very young age.
This was in stark contrast to her sisters, though, I suppose.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, they didn't like doing that.
Yeah, they had a different sort of dynamic with it. You can see the part of fortune in the seventh sign, and the ruler of that seventh house, Saturn, is in Taurus with the sun, and with that exchange of Mercury and Venus, Mercury ruling the second house of the chart. So through partnership, she got a lot of money, which is true. Her partner inherited a fortune, and the rest is history. So there's a lot of good things here in the chart, and what I would maybe say is that the Neptune in the seventh house in Pisces is also perhaps this identity that's become, so her relationship with Alice, her relationship with the author, as an adult figure and as someone who's an entertainer and things like that, that involves basically the media. That's what Neptune is also about. So I think that also played into having a relationship with all the fans and all of that sort of Neptune sort of world,
Oh gosh, Shangela is at it tonight.
Shangela is at the cats, yes, the Cheshire cats everywhere. So,
oh gosh,
yeah, she's got to protect her territory. She does, yeah. So that's, Alice Liddell, later on in her life, she went to the USA later on in the 80s, I think, and she met with the writer that wrote the Peter Pan novels. I forget what his name was. So, one has to, think about the influence of that this concept of child becomes very strong, because it is almost as if whatever the child concept is very, very enduring with this person. So the most angular planet in the chart is the Jupiter, which rules the fifth house. And from a very young age, it's very apparent in her life, because not only is she born into a very sort of upper class family in that time, but this archetype of childhood and my childhood, it's literally supporting the whole chart. It's at the base of the entire chart. That's actually supporting her entire life, what happened when she was a child. And I think that's also very, very sort of important. I think by 1863, she had moved on from what had happened. So even before she was 12 years old, she had the success and celebrity sort of status already. So again, that is the Jupiter cycle, right? Roughly 12 years, every 12 years. So anything you want to add?
I'm wondering, so to describe the father, we first looked at the Jupiter in the fourth sign. seeing that that fourth sign is not empty. So the mother is represented by possibly the 10th house. We'd first have to look at the stellium that's sitting in Taurus with her, right?
Yes.
So I could imagine that, for example, Moon opposing Saturn, and I guess also the Sun, there would have been quite a complicated dynamic with the mother as well.
Yes, that's true. Her mother was known to be very snobbish and sort of upper classy, looking down on people. And her mother basically controlled their marriages. Her mother wanted her children to marry into nobility. So you can see that the Saturn influence in that in the sign of Taurus, Saturn ruling the 7th house of also relationships, it's being opposed by the moon, which would represent the mother generally, and it's a Scorpion, so very strong, very restrictive, and very sort of, I suppose, that's also shouldn't really get along with the mother as well. So it's, I think she, in a way, maybe kind of surpassed what her mother wanted because of the Venus connecting to the Mercury and the exchange, where it's she didn't need that actually.
Yeah, because she came into an entire class of her own.
Yes.
So she most definitely didn't need somebody from the nobility or an aristocrat to help her make that. She definitely did it on her own.
Right. And she, having Saturn ruling the 7th house, also makes sense because part of her Saturn return involved her marriage, age 28, and it is 28 degrees in the ascendant-descendant axis, and that was a very stable marriage sort of for them, which sort of makes sense as well. I'm just trying to think, what else do I think I want to mention? I think that's about it, yeah? I mean, it's very curious to see charts like this because it's charts of people that life happens to them in a way.
Yeah.
All she had to do for her life to work out was keep her sun very strong. Because if you just look at the sun, and because it's ruling the ascendant, it's very important. It's very important because it's how you're sort of making decisions in your life, right? And because it's the sun, it's all about how well she knows who she is, how well she's maintaining that image, how well she is portraying herself in society and to the work that she's doing, that is the 10th house sun, So I think the influence on the sun is very strongly the Jupiter and the Mars and the Neptune, right? But the influence on the moon is very strongly Saturnine.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
But the exchange, when Venus comes to replace Mercury, the influence on the moon becomes Saturn and Venus in Taurus, so that Venus also alleviates the Saturn. The Venus also coming to Taurus removes a lot of Saturn's negativity that in the opposition to the moon and family and growing up and things like that. And obviously Saturn not only ruling the 7th house, but Saturn then also being conjunct Venus, who naturally represents relationships, shows that then she's ready to have a relationship. So, and you could look at it as the 11th house friend, that is Venus, is becoming associated with Saturn in my 10th house. And so for me, I look at it as, well, this friend that was Lewis is playing an authority role for her, a friend that's also like my father or one of my parents in her life. As a sense of solidity, because her father was away a lot working, cloistered up in university. Her mother was not really approachable. And so here's a friend who is playing, in a way, both roles for her, of mother and also father, having the association there of the Venus changing. And, you also have the yes, she did have a governess and things like that. Of course, a child of her status would have those things. But that came a bit later. And it sort of replaced Lewis in that role in her life. Okay, so let's look at the chart for Lewis himself. So Lewis, obviously his real name is Charles Dodgson, adopted the pseudonym Lewis Carroll as a kind of a evolution of his middle name Ludwig and his first name Charles, and he swapped them around. And he actually suggested 4 names to the publisher, and they chose this one. He actually knew, I don't know if you know about Macmillan Publishers, remember those guys? He knew the Macmillan person.
Oh.
Yes, so when he went to find a publisher, he had a publisher in mind. And so we expect him to have a very strong 9th house sort of too as well in his chart because of those. But this is the creative genius behind Alice in Wonderland, and so many other things about this human being's life that we're going to sort of talk about. Okay, so do you want to talk about the dodo?
Ah, yes, Lewis Carroll. So it's really weird. Apparently, so he said to have suffered from a stammer, which he was very, very self-conscious about. And for some reason, he had parodied himself as the dodo in the Alice in Wonderland books. I'm not sure how the dodo's personality was in particular, but so Alice sort of meets this dodo, and for me it's quite strange. He'd be not parodied, he caricatured himself in his own book.
Yes.
And the only other time that I've heard of that was when Stephen King wrote himself into one of his own books, personality and all.
Wow. That sounds fun.
So I believe he was a very awkward person. Quite tall, but apparently quite awkward in the way that he carried himself. And apparently the adults that he had associated with never picked up the stammer of his, which he was very self-conscious about, but the children apparently did. And it's strange because he seemed to get along better with children than he did with adults. And I guess perhaps there's, one can say probably because children are more unassuming, I guess. They don't judge or read into the things the way adults do. So one is slightly less on guard, if one would want to say that. He was also, though he apparently never let this stand in his way, because he was also a good entertainer, reportedly. So he would sing tolerably well. He could, do recitations, which was the social currency of the time, or the expected entertainment in company at the time. If you could sing or you could do a recitation, you were practically made. People loved you.
Yes.
And that's what endeared him to people in the company that he kept.
And you could say that also, it's true he was a bit reclusive in a way, but it's this is how it's nice to see these paradoxes, these apparent paradoxes in someone's life. And this is why I think it's important to know astrology, because you really get to understand the person, who is in the chart, who is the chart representing. Okay. Now we've got a little bit of a reverse situation here. We've got also a fixed stellium. That's true. But this sun is not strong.
No, it's in detriment.
And it's near the south node.
Oh gosh, yes,
right?
There it is.
So that sense of isolationism, which Aquarius can be known for if it is afflicted, is very prominent. But you also have Uranus there, you have Jupiter who rules the ascendant that is there. So the mind is very sort of inventive, acquiring information, thinking about systems, thinking about, a third sign, third house, Aquarius, and his inventions all had to do with writing, word games. He devised a way for on the typewriter to have straight justification on the right hand side, which wasn't there before. He was the one that did that. So and yeah, even from a sort of academic point of view, I suppose, in terms of continuing the traditions of his parents, because Jupiter does rule the fourth sign. His father was a clergyman, and he sort of followed in those footsteps as well. The Pisces fourth sign situation. But there is a history in his lineage of his ancestors being army officers as well. So there you're seeing the fourth house coming through very strong. Now, he was described by people as being quite dry, methodical, punctilious.
Punctilious.
Which is like, you have a sort of something stuck up somewhere. At least the look of that, right? At least the look of that, because it's so precise. You might almost even say slightly or mildly OCD. Very neat, very fixed, very sort of orderly sort of person. So there's that one side to him that is all this fixed stellium that is there, ruled by Saturn, which is the only planet above the horizon in this chart. Okay.
And all of that seems in such stark contrast to the Sagittarius ascendant.
It is.
Usually, quite outgoing and very, very social.
It really is. I mean, it's a very odd thing. So inside you have all this this depth, right, of thinking and the mind that is there. Not only, that's also further emphasized by Saturn and Mercury being an exchange, right, which is giving the mind a very strong ability to focus and be very sort of in that Virgo. Imagine if Mercury was in Virgo. That's like uber perfectionism, okay? And that is how he handled everything he did. The manuscript that he gave to Alice as the handwritten original manuscript of Alice's adventures underground, there was no mistake. It was like a medieval manuscript that was illumined. He had drawings on the sides. He had the whole artful borders which he painted by hand. It was so. At the end of it, he included in a brocade he cut out a photo of Alice, the child, the actual Alice, and stuck it there like a locket at the end of the book. So much thought and so much care and attention given into whatever he did, not just the book, whatever he did, it was to that level. It was that level of focus. And being a sort of a parishman, a clergyman in this Victorian era, a lot of the clergymen working out in the country who were, they weren't in the army, they weren't in government, they were in the church. They were part of, these sons of these rich and wealthy people who didn't need to work, okay, but they needed to be gainfully employed for the sake of actually being in society. So many of them became parish, leaders and things like that. Him being one of them, although he chose not to lead a parish because of his obvious discomfort with mass public speaking and things like that. When fans would send letters to Lewis Carroll, he told the porter at the university to send them back to the sender.
Oh.
He didn't want fan mail. He was very careful about even being photographed. All the photographs we have of him, one was from his friend that he knew at university, and this one that you see here is a self photo that he has set up.
Wow.
So he was very, very concerned about not wanting to be seen. He didn't want people to recognize him. And you sort of wonder, he's such an avid photographer,
Yes.
that is, so the paradox is there as well, with the strong Saturn Mercury and the Saturn stellium, and all of that is very, very strong as how he's carrying himself. But the ascendant being as the image that people are seeing is Sagittarius moon, first and foremost. And the moon receives the light of the sun. So the moon is a significator of cameras and mirrors and things like that are receiving the light as an image. Okay. So very strong. The moon is in Sagittarius, which is the natural 9th sign of the zodiac. And the moon rules the 8th house. And the moon is in the 1st house. And when he went to university, which is a 9th house thing, his mother died, the 8th house being ruled by the moon, the 1st house, his mother died from a brain hemorrhage. And he had to come back home and take care of affairs. So the trigger, I think that was the turning point. Because in a way, that sort of, through an uncomfortable event, sort of triggered the activation of the ascendant. And it's now time to be public about life, in a way. So it maybe sort of released him from that energy sort of dynamic, which his mother was basically standing, was, sort of in the doorway between him being protected with himself and reclusive and being okay with life that way, and actually he's part of destiny, kind of calling. So I think that moon becomes a very strong significant, because it's on the ascendant, it definitely influences the ascendant and how he relates to people, and that is how he met a lot of people. A lot of famous people were photographed by him.
His photography took him far. I mean, he even considered pursuing it as a formal career, seeing that he did it for over 24 years already.
Wow.
And I mean, a lot of people, Lord Tennyson posed for him. The scientist Michael Faraday of Faraday's law, he posed for him as well. And it sort of gave him all of these entrances into these even higher social circles, which he would otherwise have no access to at all if it wasn't for his photography.
Yes.
And then he was very sort of slow and methodical with that as well, because he used this this wet colloidal process, which was famous at the time with the large format photographers. And he actually gave up the photography because he said it was taking up too much of his time. But there was this unwillingness to change to the new dry process, the newer dry process that the photographers at the time had actually started using. That, and because of this, how the photographs themselves had changed. He seemed to have difficulty adjusting to that type of change in the style of photography, which I guess might have also been why he decided to give it up. It's quite a strange thing to see. But he loved. I mean, he photographed a lot of people, though. Mainly subjects were seen to be children. Young girls, although he also did young boys,
buildings and all sorts of
buildings,
friends, local celebrities. So the moon was, very strong. It's connected to the midheaven, so there's an aspiration to make it a career, but it's really got nothing to do with Venus and Mercury directly. Okay.
Yeah.
So fine. So once we talk about that moon being active, then we can talk about the ascendant, right? Sagittarius ascendant, okay, first of all, he was a clergyman, he was a natural teacher, but he was also an entertainer. His ability to draw cartoons and sketches and make jokes and parody, he was very good at charades, people said. And that mimicking ability with the moon rising being so strong. is sort of there in Sagittarius, which is about fun and seeking and adventure and exploring life through that and learning about life through those activities. But also you can, in conjunction with the sun, which is in Aquarius, the sun and moon are sextile each other here. A very deep thinker, but who wants to approach it and share it with other people through the moon, maybe playful or casual manner, and sort of be lighthearted with that.
And as a mathematician, he was very into recreational mathematics. One of the ways is you can actually share such deep concepts with people through a light-hearted, fun manner.
Yes.
Like you said, with word games that he used to like to release as well every now and then.
Yes. So the academic side of him was very thorough, and the thinking side of him was very thorough, and it's. Obviously, the other two planets in the ascendant then become activated. Once the moon is flowing and happening in his life, then we can talk about the other planets that are there, Venus and Mars. Venus, obviously, ruling the 11th sign and the 10th house is very important for career, all right? Especially also rules the 6th. So very work sort of focus. There's some Venusian Sagittarius sort of work happening, which is fun and explorative as well. It's conjunct Mars. Mars rules his 5th sign. It rules his 4th house. Yes, he did his creative work where he was staying. Okay, so the 5th sign is the 4th house. That is conjunct. So the ruler of his 5th sign and 5th house is conjunct the ruler of his 10th house, and it's in the rising sign. That's very, very strong. And that whole Venus-Mars conjunction is connected also to the ruler of the ascendant, the Jupiter. So that's a very strong activation. So because the Jupiter is connected to Venus and Mars, and also rules Venus and Mars, and also rules the ascendant, that Jupiter is bringing together the 10th house and the 5th house through him personally, because it's the ruler of the ascendant, the Jupiter. And the Jupiter is on the 3rd house cusp, so something is going to write. He wrote numerous papers, both in mathematics as well as literature. So the dual nature of the rising sign is coming through. But the end up form of what it came out to be was a Jupiter Aquarius sort of piece of work, which, think about Sagittarius and Aquarius working together. If we just want to focus Jupiter as being the book that he eventually wrote, Alice in Wonderland, having Sagittarius and Aquarius work together, it does have an otherworldly sort of feel about it. It's adventurous, it's explorative, it's also philosophical, it's also educational, it's entertaining, it's demonstrative, it's new idea, it's a bit revolutionary, it's an invention of literature and as a literature genre, it's sort of very, very strong. Because the way children were looked at in that time was very, very structured and very saturnine. You had your place. Everyone in Victorian England, Britain or UK, whatever they call themselves, everyone in Great Britain knew their place in society, and that includes the children. But here comes someone who's writing totally nonsense genre stuff, and it's taking people... some people didn't like it, some people loved it. This is the nature of Aquarius, right? It's ahead of its time in a way. It's futuristic. Both Aquarius and Sagittarius are visionary in that way, in that sense. So I think that's very, very one way of seeing how it manifested. And it can even tell us how it manifested. The Jupiter's in the 3rd house, right? And these were like his neighbors. These were children of his neighbors, right? 3rd house is our neighbors. And he was taking them, he was with a colleague of his from university. And they were rowing the children down the Thames on this day in April 1950, what was it? April 1950, 1856, sorry, at the end of April 1856. And so he's there with Alice and her two sisters and his colleague from work, and they demand that he entertain them and tell them a story. And he basically insisted that he won't do it now, he'll do it later because he has to focus on drawing. You know, he's there to enjoy the scenery. And Alice said to him, because he said, I'll do it at another time. And she said, another time is now. I want the story now. Yeah.
You don't put Leo on his place. Nope.
You know, so that, and so spontaneously, while he's rowing, you know, third house is also transport. Yeah. And so his rowing, Jupiter rules the fourth sign, which is Pisces. So he's rowing on the water, third house using his hands. He's rowing on the water. And at the same time, he's also telling the story spontaneously, just making it up as he goes. And he's not only, you know, it's not just a children's novel because he's entertaining the children, he's also entertaining his colleague as well. So it's a bit of philosophy, it's a bit of mathematics, so his colleague would understand those themes in the novel, in the story, and appreciate it. So you can see that conscientious nature with moon rising. You are very considerate of people being sort of there.
I mean, if I think of how we would entertain, I mean the references in the book, and I mean I just thought of two of them, were very, very subtle. In the part where Alice falls down the rabbit hole and she somehow magically decreases in size, and she sort of muses, and she says she wonders if she's going to.
Sorry, she sort of what? I just couldn't hear you. What did you say?
So she said she wonders if she's going to keep on getting smaller and smaller, and then perhaps go out like a candle. And therein, for example, is a description of how limits work. And like I said before, it's a central idea to differential and integral calculus. Many people don't understand the idea of you approach something, a value, whatever it is, but you won't actually ever get there. So in a way, this is a really a really simplistic description of what the limit is.
Right.
But it's easy for people to understand. Another one where he brings in a little bit of logic, because he also did a lot of work in symbolic logic in particular, is when Alice is actually at the Mad Hatter's tea party. And she says something to the dormouse, and the dormouse looks at her, and the dormouse responds to her and says, well, what you just said is the same as, I mean, I can't say I eat what I see. Then you might as well just say that I eat what I see is the same as I see what I eat, which is not the same thing. If we focus on it, using mathematical logic, that is to say, a statement is not the same as its converse.
Okay.
And if you think about it, you eat what you see, or yes, you eat what you see and you see what you eat are definitely not two of the same things. There'd have to be conditions for it to be true. But one read these types of things in the novel, and you sort of overlook it the first time. You don't think much of it, and you go back and you realize, wow, this is really complex.
Yes, it is.
And something to think about.
And to think that he's doing this while he's rowing on the boat.
Exactly.
And
not many people
will be able to do that. And he, not only that, after that, she demands that he writes it down for her. And, you have to give me what I want, right? And in the way that I want it. So he took about 1.5 years to put it all together. So in a way, it was kind of downloaded. We don't know, but he gave it to her for a Christmas present about 1.5 years later, in 1864, end of the year. So that's a very short time to write a book. I mean,
Definitely.
to write a book of nonsense is difficult
Mm-hmm.
without it just being a whole bunch of nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a certain art to that can be underappreciated. It's like you gotta really make an effort to fail. It takes a lot of effort, actually, you know. So writing a book about nothing actually requires skill if it's going to be popular. And to do it in a year and a half is very, I mean, some of that time was him, most of that time was basically him agonizing over it being perfect. I mean, we have the trial sketches that he was making. He went back and forth with the illustrator about exactly what he wanted the picture to look like. I mean, the poor illustrator, right? I mean, dealing with a Saturn Virgo person who's, you know, very strong, that Mercury. So, but, you know, with Pluto in his fifth sign, he's going to have very strong terms and conditions and be controlling of those things because it's who he is. It's his unique creative abilities and impulse. It's Aries, right? And even when he had the book published, he insisted on it being in a red cover, whereas most of the other books at the time were in dark green and dark blue covers. And so he wanted that Mars is joined with the Venus. And that is what is the work that he's doing, it's the output of what he's doing. So it was a red covered book is what he produced. Like I said, Alice was the first female protagonist in a children's novel at the time. And he was the ambiguity of the rising sign for him, I think, is exactly that. It's also exacerbated by the moon. So when you met him, that charisma is there, that sociability is there, but at the same time, the awkwardness of the Mercury-Saturn is also there at the same time. So it may give the impression that he's holding back things or he's not being truthful, but actually he's just how he is. There are these two sides of the personality, and that is how it was. Even as a young child, he was entertaining his siblings. He wrote caricatures for them. He wrote the plays for them. So he was very giving in that sense. You know, it is a Jupiter sign rising, and he. So I think having the fifth sign ruler in the ascendant is pretty strong. It's a pretty strong statement. It's and you could say, well, how could he be so successful if the sun is so afflicted? But remember, he wasn't. A sun success is like celebrity, like with Alice, you know, the Liddell. You know, she was out giving talks, being snapshotted here and photographed there. That is like the sun, you know. He was not that. He was the moon kind of popular. He was popular. What he produced had social relevance to people. It was a big social contribution that affected communities and the way families happen, the way children grow up, and, you know, the whole sort of the moon in life is what was changing and what he changed. You know, so his popularity is coming from the moon. It's not coming from, because his ability to receive the ideas from his sun and channel that in a creative, adventurous, entertaining way, the Sagittarius moon, that is what gave him the popularity. So he got the popularity from the moon, not the sun. And it's important to understand that there are these two kinds of popularity in life.
Yes, indeed.
So I think that's kind of, what else can we say about this chart?
You also spoke about the fact that he edited himself a lot, personally.
A lot.
And it's strange because today less than half of his collection, well, at some point less than half of his photographic collection actually survived, and people think that he actually destroyed some of his own photographs.
Oh wow!
Perhaps he wasn't happy with it. But even these personal diaries that he kept for some strange reason some of them were also destroyed. Maybe they could have been after he died, so maybe it could have been done by family members. Who knows?
Right,
But there's still this theme of this theme of editing that goes on even after his death.
Yes, there was a lot of editing, and there was a lot of editing of his personal diaries and journals after his death. He does have a fifth house ruler conjunct the Venus, and he does have the eighth house ruler in the ascendant. Just the Venus-Mars conjunction in a fire sign alone is, he had many relationships with women, adult women. Some of it became a problem. That was one of the reasons why he was asked to leave in 1863, away from the family that he had been with for so long at the university. And when he returned to the family at the end of that year, it was very, very formal, because reportedly he was doing things with the governess and stuff like that. So he was, he was a naughty boy, but as most contexts of Venus-Mars sort of do that. And he had their conjunct, so it's quite prominent. But his family then after he died, they, especially some of his nieces, they spent a lot of time removing a lot of that from his diaries, and in order to protect his reputation, because in the Victorian world, having multiple relationships and things like that, was frowned upon, because it was all this ideal family sort of situation. And so in a strange way, now people have this image of Lewis Carroll that he only spent time with little girls, which is so not true. And so people think that, there could have been an erotic element to his association with these young girls. A couple of things to that. The view of children was very different in the Victorian time. They had nude children on Christmas cards and all sorts of things which nowadays would not be done, not even be considered to be done. So, yes, it is ambiguous. It is there. It's open to debate. And to be honest, it could possibly go both ways. But I actually, given the look of this chart, I'm not inclined to, my personal view, my opinion is that it is not the erotic element with the children, because I think it was just in his, that moon rising nature can be really giving and really sort of, remember, because that moon also activated his mother's death. So it's a very sensitive point where he understands the loss of mother and the loss of family that children all around him in Victorian England were going through, working in the factories and things like that. So I think also being part of the clergy, and his writings were very clear on his belief and his faith. It wasn't even a question. So, the Leo with the North Node is the ninth house, very strong. So I think that played a lot into his writing. I mean, he was part of one of these one of these movements, art movements. In that time, there were a lot of these emerging art movements, like not the Reformation. I don't know what they're called. Impressionists, and there was one with the R that he sort of belonged to. That was, I think it was the Romantic movement or something like that. But they were basically trying to re-emphasize the flow in painting, as opposed to just the clear and crisp outlines. And he was very much into the emotive sort of art, which obviously having moon rising makes sense for someone like this. So he was, my view is, yes, the moon is linked with Pluto. The moon rules the 8th house. But like I said, I think that is just his control and the death of his mother happening to him, and I think it makes it very sensitive. And I agree, it could possibly go both ways, but there's absolutely no primary evidence to suggest.
Yeah, I mean, from what I read, the best seems to have been speculation. I mean, some people speculate that he probably didn't even want to admit things to himself. So we'll never know. There's too much ambiguity going around.
And unfortunately, the editing of his works by his family protected his reputation in that time, in the sense that he didn't have outside relationships. But with our modern eyes, that removing of that evidence of his, sort of at least primary evidence of his multiple relationships with the adult woman, makes us think he only had relationships with young underage girls, and by the way, the age of consent in Victorian England was 12 years old. So,
oh my word.
Yes, at that point people can become betrothed and you can start courting and things. Very, very, we think the world only was different 500 years ago. The world was very different not even 150 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, the whole point is that despite the personal, you can see the art in the chart is how these two sides of this one human being, the controlled and the focused and the explorative, the imaginative and the adventurous and the playful are actually happening together. And I think it's important as an astrologer, when you're looking at a chart, you have to sort of read the chart thematically, not just like cookbook style, So, the only planet, visible planet he has in a movable sign is the area. I mean, the Mercury, and even that becomes Saturn. So, how movable is it really?
No,
so quite not, right? And having the emphasis on the first house, second house, third house, he's a very private person, So people say, oh, he's a suppressed whatever, but I mean, it is possible for someone to have a very private life, and he was very, very sort of private with he did have diaries, but he was also very sort of private about, and the one incident where the interest with the governess of the children and him being sort of told to leave because of that, and he cut his niece cut those pages out of the diary.
Wow.
Yeah, we know that from a secondary source. And so, I mean, it must have been quite devastating for him to know that he caused this, his own Venus-Mars issues. He couldn't really contain. And here comes the governess, and there we go. And this is jeopardizing my relationship with these children who I really, really care for. So I think it must have been quite traumatic for him, because I think 5 months of the diary are missing from June 1863 of the year, when he was invited back for dinner. So in truth, we will never know what actually caused that. But the genius behind the Jupiter in Aquarius, which you normally, you say it's in the third house. According to traditional rules of astrology, it's in the third house. It's cadent. It's not that dignified. But wow, what a strong, what channeling that Jupiter did. And what I like about it is that you can see how life is activating the chart. He is rowing on the river. Third house Jupiter ruling Pisces, and the child pushes him to speak, to tell him a story, to do the Sagittarius storytelling, right? And it just downloads. It just like this Aquarius plug just comes down into his mind. So I also, this is part of the magical or remedial side of astrology, where if you're not happy with something in your chart, you can activate it and then work it differently. You know, you can actively put yourself in the situation and change it around. You know, so I would say to him, like, every time he's doing charades, in a way, he's activating his moon. Every time he's capturing a photo to keep, he's in a way closing the hole of the loss of his mother. You can get all psychological about it if you need to, right? But that's not the first interpretation I'd give the person. And that is the nature of his attraction and his connection to everybody. We all know him as the guy who gave us a fun Sagittarius story that reminds us of our childhood. If there was anyone that could embody that essence of childhood, you would obviously, if there was an author that was going to do that, they would need to be very connected to their inner child. They would need to themselves be very connected with children and care about children in order to know how to spontaneously produce a piece of writing and work that connected to children all over the world. You know what I'm saying?
That still do. It still does, actually.
Still does today. So I think to twist and turn and the dynamic of what the person did, I think in a way demeans their contribution into society. Because now everyone likes a good scandal nowadays, and everyone wants to demonize a man very quickly. But I think as a human being, the way I look at the chart is that my view is that he didn't have that sort of relationship. Maybe in the future we'll have a primary evidence source that tells us otherwise. But I think
maybe
it doesn't undermine. What's that?
Yeah, that's it. Maybe the last pages might turn up.
Maybe they might turn up, and then the dodo shaking Alice's hand will be a totally different story.
Dodo will be dead.
Dodo will be dead. Yes. And it's very interesting because was the dodo extinct by that time? I don't know.
I can't remember. I'm not sure.
Because it's kind of interesting that he chose an animal that was extinct. So even, his resistance to be known is even in the choice of animal he chose is an animal you can't even see externally. It's quite a thorough sort of reclusiveness there happening.
No Brit would have seen a dodo because they were native to Madagascar. Yes, Madagascar.
I think there was some. Wasn't there some in Iceland? I'm not sure.
I can't remember.
I don't know.
Let one check.
But having wings and you can't fly. But you're still a bird.
Part of the family.
I think there's a lot of this in Lewis Carroll's ideations of paradoxes juxtaposed. So a bird that's there but is extinct, a bird but it can't fly. So there's so many of these. I think he liked playing that. He liked playing with that.
So I just checked. The dodo was native to Mauritius.
That's right, Mauritius. Interesting. And when did it go extinct?
Let's see. When did it go extinct? Extinction. Let's see. 1715. The Dutch left Mauritius in 1710, but by then the dodo had largely become extinct.
Okay, so it was yes. So
gosh,
interesting. That's very interesting.
Interesting choice to make.
Yes. So it's been quite as well established that this is an extinct bird, and so that also gives the sense that Alice is really meeting not just weird creatures, but she's meeting creatures that no longer exist in this world. She's meeting them in Wonderland. So you look at the initial drawings of his with the Alice and as he wanted to portray Alice and the dodo, and like everyone looks sort of very sad. It's almost as if like Alice is the only one that has any choice to be in Wonderland. All these other fantastical animals are like, they're just there, you know, they can't get out. They're kind of stuck there. They're imprisoned in Wonderland. And there's this whole sense of, I think that brooding nature of the Saturn Mercury that is also behind that. There's another message there about what is this Wonderland? Because initially it was Alice's adventures underground, right? Yeah, which fits his chart, you know, but because the Jupiter is literally underground. But you also have that sense of that underground, you know, we don't associate, it has a negative connotation going underground. The ideas are going underground. My identity is going underground. My childhood is going underground. There's all these other things that you could say are being suppressed underground. But I think it's a very fascinating book to study, which is always what's fun about the nonsense genre, is that you can see how your mind is by how you're reading the book and how you're interpreting it. Exactly. Which is quite fun.
And I read that he apparently took great care to make sure that the Alice that was portrayed in the books was quite different to Alice to Alice. In particular, I think in the way that she was drawn, I can't remember if this particular Alice was drawn blonde or something like that, which was in stark contrast to the real Alice, who was actually dark-haired. And I think I read that somewhere too.
Well, I mean, when they went to the Tea Party episode, there were three little dormouses that were there, and they each had names. Lacey, Elsie, and I think Tinny, and Ottilie.
Oh?
Yes, they had names, and these are the three girls. Lacey obviously is Alice, backwards, right? Elsie is her elder sister. Those were her initials, LC. So he made it name Elsie, and the nickname for the younger sister was Tinny. Everybody.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he included them, and Alice, the main character, her fiery, feisty, no-nonsense nature. She's always questioning everybody in Wonderland. She's making them trying to think, you know, why are you here? What's going on here? What the hell happened to everybody? That sort of, not only have a female protagonist for that time, but it's also a child female protagonist for that time. That is quite revolutionary in the literature world of that time. And to have a female protagonist on her own, away from home, handling things, and questioning things, you didn't ask questions at this time. Children didn't ask questions at this time. So it's very, there's so much to say about his visionary for what he wants children, what he thinks children means, what he thinks childhood means in the journey of life, you know, where questions should be asked, where that should be encouraged, that sort of exploration of life in all these different forms and whatever. Because in a way you could see that everyone in Wonderland, all these trapped animals, are all the adults in the world. And, you know, they're all having their own idiosyncrasies.
Then I wonder who the Queen of Hearts could have been. Makes one wonder.
Makes one really do wonder. I mean, we all knew his mother, Alice's mother everyone knew she was a difficult woman. Yeah. Okay, I think that's, it was good. I think it was good, Patrick. So we've looked at the art of astrology in the charts of Alice Liddell and Lewis Carroll, both intimately involved in creating this very fun novel literature, Alice in Wonderland, or The Adventures of Alice in Wonderland, or The Adventures of Alice Underground, and its sequels. But yeah, so I would suggest you read it even if you're an adult. It's very fun, entertaining, and it kind of puts your mind in a different space, just in terms of, I mean, it's one of the first times in the literature world in Victorian era where the pictures were happening next to the words. You see, in most of the literature at the time, because of they have to construct a separate copper plate for the picture, usually the pictures were on a separate page to the writing. But what he did, Lewis was so insistent, he found a typesetter that would do what he wanted. So he got like Alice on with her neck gets longer. He's got her on the margin of the page next to the writing. So that was also quite new for the time. It was quite something different. And even in how the text, like the mouse tail, where all the text is written in a mouse tail sort of. I mean, imagine the painstaking job of the typesetter to do that.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's
so in the end, it's a literal work of art.
Yes, in the end, literal work of art, and perfectionism is a thing. But hey, it did pay off. It did pay off, I suppose.
It did.
Great. Okay. So thanks, Patrick, for your time. It's been a long day for all of us.
Yeah.
Very interesting charts. Great, thanks. And thanks all of you for watching.
Cool. I
hope you found some motivation and some inspiration for your inner child as well. All right. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.